Three, two, one, and we are rocking and rolling. Ladies and gents, welcome back to the channel. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I've been in this guy's inbox pestering him for months to come and talk to me, and I've eventually managed to seal the deal so we can sit down and have this conversation. Right. Before we get started, I want to give this the introduction it deserves. Bit of a mega introduction, but every word is 100% true. I've read a lot of books in my life. I've read a lot of books. I've read the World War I epic Bird Song by Sebastian Faulks, which made me cry. I've read the medieval epic Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, 1,000 pages, couldn't put it down. And this book, genuinely, in my mind, sits next to those literary classics as one of the best books I've ever read, because it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the funniest book I have ever read in my life. It's this book, Free Country, by George Mahood. I'm going to let him tell you what it's all about. So, George, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the Seb Whitehouse Show, and thanks a lot for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Seb. What an introduction. Yeah, I don't know how I can compete with that. Wow. Yeah, thank you very much. So, yeah, my first book, which feels like a long time ago, which Seb's kindly plugged, it's basically a penniless journey the length of Britain. So a friend and I had the crazy idea, which began, as most good ideas do, after a few too many beers in the local pub. And we decided we wanted an adventure. Both of us have been keen to do sort of Land's End to John O'Groats trip, but we didn't have the money or wherewithal to sort of embark on a proper supported trip or fully supported. And we'd also got a bit sort of disillusioned with the negative press about society and, the idea that every door hides an axe murder and stuff, and the sort of we wanted to set out to prove kindness to strangers. So those sort of three areas fell together, and we decided to embark on a penniless journey. So we set off from Land's End in a pair of Union Jack boxer shorts, nothing else, no phones, money, shoes, clothes, bikes, and the idea, we'd sort of allowed ourselves 3 weeks. We were both sort of self-employed but didn't have a lot of work on at the time, so we had a sort of 3-week window in which to try and get to John O'Groats, relying purely on the kindness of strangers. So we set off penniless, clothless and stuff, and without doing too many spoilers, we made it to John O'Groats in just under 19 days, I think, fully clothed, with bikes, having very rarely missed a meal, found somewhere to sleep most nights, sort of a variety of different accommodations. But had a wonderful trip, and that formed the basis of my book.
Yeah. So I just want to emphasize the ridiculousness of this mission, because I've actually cycled Land's End to John O'Groats. And if anyone tries to cycle Land's End to John O'Groats, walk Land's End to John O'Groats, run Land's End to John O'Groats, they're going to be standing there like feeling extremely nervous, right? Even if they have every night of their trip planned, even if they have a debit card with all the money in the world in it, they've got all the gear, they've got the bike, they've got the clothes, they've got support from family and friends, everything, they're still going to be nervous. And I remember standing at Land's End, I had my bike, I had my panniers, I had my stove, I had money, I had all the gear. And I was nervous, because I had to cycle the length of Great Britain. And yet you went down there. Let's just be really clear. Like, what were the rules of this trip? You had no money. You didn't have any clothes apart from boxer shorts when you first got there.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed to even hitchhike. You had to blag bicycles in order to get to the top. So everything you needed came for free from the kindness of strangers.
Absolutely. And we also made another rule that we weren't allowed to handle money either. So we couldn't sort of do any work in exchange for money to then buy food. We did at one point in Lancaster, I think it was. You might know better than me. We did. We bussed for food. So we even put up a sign saying, "We don't want money. We just want food, please," because we want to sort of take money out of the equation. But going back to your comment about the fear, yeah, absolutely, we were terrified and stuff, but probably not necessarily any more than anyone else that sets off. Obviously, when you start a planned Land's End to John O'Groats, I think your fear is about all the things that could potentially go wrong. And particularly, the more you organise it, the more preparation goes in, the more the risk of errors. Whereas for us, everything already had gone wrong. The fact that we were standing there in our pants, that's probably, in theory, we hope that was as bad as it was going to be. And because we didn't have any expectations of needing to be somewhere by a certain time, it sort of gave us this weird sense of freedom, I guess, that was just sort of see how that unfolded. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know how far we'd get on the first day. So it's just a case of just being open to the adventure, really.
Yeah, that's so funny what you say about how it can only get better from here, because that hadn't actually occurred to me. Because I must admit, the whole time I was reading your book, I was laughing a lot, as I said, because it's a really funnily written book, and it's just I admire the adventure itself so much as well. Because I bet a lot of the feedback you've had from the book has been like, wow, that's funny, that's wacky, that's eccentric, what you like, that sort of stuff. But really, what I took from it is just the genuine courage it takes to stand at the bottom of Great Britain in your pants with the aim of getting to John O'Groats, with not being able to support. You had no control over the situation whatsoever. I've got a good friend that I go that I've done a lot of traveling with. I've been to 17 countries with him, and I wrote a Facebook status last night about this interview we're doing today. I sort of said, like, George Mahood wrote this book, he traveled the length of Great Britain, he didn't spend any money, it's an amazing read. And my friend who I've done all this traveling with commented underneath and said, like, oh, that sounds like a really good interview, I look forward to watching that. And I said, I will 100% recreate this mission with you if you're up for it. And this is a guy that's quite adventurous, that's quite into traveling, and he said not a chance. And I spoke to him. We had a discussion about it on Facebook Messenger, and he was like, as much as I love traveling, as much as I love going on adventures, the complete lack of control would just scare the shit out of me. Because you were just walking into the unknown. And usually when people have a plan, even though there's more to go wrong, at least they kind of know what they're shooting towards. Whereas you had no control over what was happening. Like, did you anticipate definitely being able to get to John O'Groats relying on the kindness of strangers, or did you think it might not even be possible?
Yeah, I think Ben, who the guy that I traveled with, we were more confident than most people. Most sort of friends and even family sort of, I think we were a bit dubious and sort of, but I think the fact that we started meant that we had a lot of confidence that we would get there. And also, although it's a sort of crazy wacky challenge, it's completely, I mean, it's relatively safe and non-adventurous. I mean, the worst case scenario is we fail on the first day and we just go home and stuff. It's not like we're putting ourselves in any danger. I think that's weirdly part of the appeal of the book. I mean, I read lots of adventure books of people climbing Everest, walking the Amazon, swimming oceans and stuff. And the appeal of this journey is that it is the kind of thing that anybody could do. I mean, it's the kind of thing so people read it and go, oh yeah, I'd love to do something like that. And you absolutely could. There's nothing sort of stopping you. You're outside your comfort zone, but not to sort of any extent that there's going to be any sort of life-changing decision. And just get back, I think the part of the craziness, you do need a reliable travel companion, because Ben is far more eccentric than me. I needed him, I think, to not only give me the confidence to start it, but he was part of the impetus of the premise. So I sort of thought, oh, we could maybe get some secondhand clothes before we start, and maybe get a bike off Free Cycle or something. And then we both agreed that we'd start without a bike. And so I said, oh, at least we'll get some clothes from a charity shop. And Ben was the one who said, no, we're starting in our pants. End of story. That's it's got to be like that way. And he was right. I think literally stripping things back to basics is to the bare bones is the way it had to be done. But if you're keen to do it, Seb, there's plenty of people out there that would love to do it. And it's not unique. There's plenty of people that have gone on penniless challenges in the past and stuff, and there'll be loads more in the future. You should give it a go, because any journey, anything like this, is going to be completely different anyway. You're going to meet a completely different set of people, stay in all sorts of different things and have different experiences. It's just a sort of premise of an adventure. So I totally think you should give it a go.
Yeah. Well, if I did it, it would be with the aim of making a YouTube series paying homage to your book. I would call it like the sequel.
Well, honestly, I'd love to. I'd be a huge fan to watch something like that, and I'm sure you'll get many willing volunteers. You probably don't want.
Yeah. Well, that's actually an interesting thing. I mean, I'd like to get started in a sec, like as in I want to start from where we were at Land's End, but I will ask one question before we go to the moment that you were standing at Land's End on your pants and you just started walking north. Do you think it would have been possible to do this on your own, or do you think the sort of the ups and downs every day would have meant that the partner in crime made it so much easier, someone to bounce off?
Yeah, it's a good question. I certainly wouldn't have. It's not something I would have started on my own. I think I needed the experience. You needed someone with a like-minded naivety, I guess, to begin something like this, and also just the sort of reassurance that you're not, completely out of your mind. That there's someone obviously else that feels that it's possible. So yeah, no, I think it would be possible. I don't think any of the kindness we experienced from people was because of the fact there was two of us there. I think it was just benefit to each of us to to have a friend and companion there to share the experience with. It just made things easier. But as far as it being possible, absolutely, it'd be I would have thought just as doable on your own.
Yeah, because I was wondering when you just for everyone listening, there's points in the book where George and Ben they slept on a boat, on a barn. They managed to blag 3 hotels, 3 B&Bs. So they really did well for the whole trip. I'm right in saying you didn't even spend a single night out on the streets, did you? You spent a night in a tent, I think.
Came close a couple of times. Yeah, there was a couple of times it was sort of just before midnight that we found somewhere to stay. And no, but like say, yeah, so we found a roof over our heads every night. Tent, canal boat, barn. We slept on a street floor in Bath. Slept in a polytunnel. Posh hotel, a pub, all sorts. Yeah, it was.
It's so ridiculous. It's such a funny idea for a mission. And I really like what you were saying before about how anyone can do it. It doesn't require any athletic prowess whatsoever, because you're completely right in saying like everyone wants to go on adventures, but they don't think they can walk for far enough or cycle or climb mountains. But just stand at Land's End in your pants and start walking north and see what happens. Anyone can do it.
And it's so often money and equipment is another barrier that people often use as a means to stop themselves going on adventure. They sort of say, "Oh, I have to save up for this, or need a better bike or this kind of thing." So the fact that we had nothing at all shows that it's possible to have an adventure like this without absolutely anything at all. So
yeah, absolutely, mate. Yeah, well, like I say, I applaud you. I think it was an incredible mission. It's a very well written book as well. And before we started talking, I said to you that I might be the only person to have read this book twice while studiously making notes. I have one of these notes here. I think this should get the ball rolling quite nicely. Page 16. We were given a lift down to Cornwall the day before by a willing friend, and we spent the night in a nearby B&B and enjoyed a last supper at the local pub. Early the following morning, we handed our clothes, wallets, shoes, and phones to our willing friend, who then waved us goodbye and left us stranded on the cliff tops in our pants. So there you are. You're standing in the cliff tops in your pants. What happens next?
Well, weirdly, because don't be deceived by the front cover of the book where there's bright blue sky and sunshine and stuff. That was recreated in landlocked Northamptonshire. For the book, when we were standing there in 1st or 2nd September, I think it was blowing an absolute gale and chucked it down with rain and stuff. So it made us feel very alive, but it also made us even more urgent to get clothes and stuff. And that happened so surprisingly quickly. We thought we'd be half naked for at least half a day. And the first person we spoke to there's some other random tourists who were there. I think it was sort of 7 o'clock in the morning. We set off pretty early. Some random tourists there, and one of us gave them a spare T-shirt that they had on holiday. So we had a T-shirt within a matter of minutes, and then we went into the Land's End Hotel and politely asked if we could have a look through their lost property, and anything that had been there longer than a month or something like that was the they could apply the finders keepers losers weepers rule. And so we left the hotel almost fully clothed. I had a pair of suit trousers that were about 10 sizes too big that I had to tie up with baler twine and wrap around my waist to stop them falling around my ankles. And we had a couple of cardigans, baseball caps, T-shirts, and Ben was a trouserless for most of the first day, and eventually got a pair of tracksuit bottoms later that first day. I mean, we got one pair of shoes between the two of us to start with, and then eventually over the course of the first couple of days, we acquired various other items that got us all the way.
So you had one pair. So you were walking along wearing a shoe each.
Walking along wearing a shoe each, yeah. We figured that was then it was half as much pain. So yeah, it was quite gravelly down on the road there, and then we got a pair of wellies a couple of miles from Land's End, I think it was, which were far too small, which we wore for a few miles, but they did more damage to our feet than walking barefoot. So and then I think on day 2 or 3 we got another pair of trainers, and that's all we needed to get the whole way there.
Do you remember the first, because something I was quite surprised at when I read your book, and I thought this was extremely ballsy, and I suppose you have to be ballsy in that situation where you don't have any choice, but when you found yourself without clothes at the start, and then without accommodation on several nights, you would just be knocking on random houses, asking them for things, basically. Do you remember the first house that you knocked on? Because I've got it written down here. I'm wondering if you remember it.
I think the first house we knocked on, yeah, that must be when we got the wellies, I think, was it? The farmer's house. And that, yeah, that was quite bizarre because Ben was still only partially clothed. So he was standing there in his pants. So I didn't feel as bad as he would have done because I had, from what I remember, I had a cardigan and suit trousers and one shoe. So compared to Ben, I was very well dressed. Yeah, what did feel very, very weird. I mean, even just asking the first people for clothes felt very strange, but because it wasn't the case of just us, being on a high street asking them, but the fact that we were standing there in our pants made us more of a spectacle, I guess. Anyway, so people were obviously drawn to us, thinking, who are these weirdos standing in the wind and rain in their pants? And so they were obviously there was an interest already, and so yeah, it was a bit weird to then say, don't suppose you have any clothes, do you? And then we'd have to sort of explain the premise of our trip. And without exception, the whole way, everybody that we mentioned it to was just thought it was a great idea and we're really keen to help. And weirdly, probably only 1% of the people we asked, because we purposely wanted to keep the idea of charity out, because there's lots of very willing causes and people go on adventures to raise money for charity. But we didn't want people's kindness to be influenced by charity. So we didn't want to just sort of say, oh, we're raising money for the, Ben and I both did a bit of fundraising independently, but we didn't want to rely on fundraising to influence people's kindness and stuff. So, but weirdly, the thing we didn't expect was hardly any, seriously, about 1 in 100 people that we asked sort of said, are you raising money for charity? And people didn't question it. They sort of just saw it for what it was, saw it as a sort of ludicrous challenge and wanted to help in any way they could, which was, yeah, that was reassuring and something we didn't expect at all.
Well, something that I found very heartwarming and quite surprising actually on reading the book is that even though it does sound like you suffered along the way, and even though it does sound like it was a bit of an emotional and physical journey, it almost seemed quite easy. As in, you didn't spend a night on the streets, you don't write much about going hungry, and actually it seems like when you would ask people, oh, have you got anything you're throwing out from the shop, or do you have any leftover food in this restaurant that you're not serving this evening, that people they wouldn't just give you a little bit. People would fill your plates up. You were actually, almost seemed as if people were giving you more than what they needed to, and more than what you were even asking for, because people, from what I can tell anyway, people loved the sound of the trip so much they were just falling over themselves to help. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair in sort of most cases, and we always felt much happier when we were. I mean, obviously we were scrounging off people, but we didn't want to be a burden. So where possible, we wanted to do something in return. So we'd offer to, wash dishes and do cleaning and things, and do any odd jobs and stuff. And lots of occasions where we did, do a shift in a kitchen in exchange for lunch, or we cleaned the entire outside of a hotel in Oakhampton. Various bits, but more often than not, people would sort of purposely not want to give us work and would be rather prefer just to give us food and sort of know that we've had a hard day cycling. So yeah, it did all come very easily. The cycling Land's End to Toronto, which was obviously very physically tough, and people often say that I don't sort of go on about the physical hardship in the book and stuff, but I didn't think people would have too much sympathy, to be honest. The fact that we were putting ourselves through this, I didn't want to dwell on how tough it was each day, because I sort of thought that goes without saying. Cycling 1,000 miles is hard work on inadequate bikes makes it particularly hard and stuff. But that sort of became a sort of a side issue. The physical side wasn't as important as eating and finding somewhere to stay. So that became the actual physical thing became less important to us almost, and the sort of second part of the challenge, perhaps the less challenging part of the challenge as well.
Yeah, it must have been very physically and mentally draining, because as I said, I've cycled Land's End to John O'Groats, and even though it's mainly a physical challenge, it is a mental challenge as well, because you're bloody exhausted the whole time. So to undergo that same trip without knowing that I could just check into a hotel or set up my tent whenever I wanted and just wander into a cafe or a restaurant and eat food whenever I wanted. It's a funny one, mate, because like, as much as I like the idea of doing the trip, like, I found it tough cycling from Land's End to John O'Groats, and I'll tell you what's embarrassing. It took me a week longer than your trip. That's the thing. You managed to do it in 3 weeks, but I did the long route, admittedly, and I wasn't in a particular rush. But I did it over a period of 4 weeks, and I found that hard enough. And I didn't have to blag my food, and I didn't have to blag somewhere to stay. So it's quite amazing that you did it, really. So I guess there's three things, isn't there, that I would like to get across to everyone listening. There's three main things. There's clothes and bikes, there's accommodation, and there's food, right? And those are the things that you set off without that you needed to have. Now, let's just kind of quickly jump from one to the other. I want to look at each average day. Did you always manage to get 3 meals a day?
Probably not 3 meals a day, but I don't think there were many occasions where we went properly hungry. Yeah, probably not quite 3 meals a day, but we were adequately fed, and I don't think there was any occasion where we went to bed very, very hungry and stuff. So no, we were very fortunate in that instance. But just going back to your previous point, 4 weeks. I think the longer you spend doing a trip like this, unless you're planning on breaking any sort of records, the longer the better and stuff. But journeys like this, it's you want to see as much of the country or the place you're visiting as possible. So I think I'm all for slow travel. Ours sort of sped up. I mean, it took us something crazy like 3 days just to leave Cornwall and stuff, because we were obviously on foot to start with. But then we did speed up. And Ben, my traveling companion, I think he didn't have the same enthusiasm for the journey towards the end as I did. And he loved the whole trip and still talks back fondly of it. But by the time we got to Scotland, he was ready to leave. So we were sort of on a bit of a mission just to get to John O'Groats at that point.
And
so, no, but we didn't. We were very lucky and didn't go hungry. Very fortunate.
All right, so food. So here we are. You managed to successfully do 3 weeks length of Great Britain without spending any money on food. So that says a lot about the kindness of the people you encountered. We covered clothes briefly. I know you got some clothes from Land's End, and then you acquired a few garments as you went along. And then, so I guess the other thing is bikes, because we've been talking about this. We've clarified that you didn't have any bikes, but we've skipped the part. Where the hell did you manage to get bikes from? I honestly, I can't stress this enough. I wouldn't have even thought this trip was possible if I dreamed it up. I would have just think, no way. Maybe food, maybe clothes, but bicycles as well. So talk me through the bike saga, because I know there was a few ups and downs along the way.
Have you visited your local tip? I went to our local tip last week, and there must have been about 15 bikes there. I looked and thought, imagine if and some of them are decent bikes, way better than the ones we used for our Land's End to John O'Groats trip. So yeah, there's a lot of people. Bikes sort of, unfortunately, have become a bit sort of disposable to some extent and stuff. But it was a challenge. So we set off. We walked for most of the first day on foot with our odd shoes and small wellies, and then just as it was getting dark on the first day, we'd been asking anyone we sort of saw in the sort of street outside these little Cornish villages. We asked if they knew any old bikes that were been thrown out, and we met a farmer at a house, and just as it was getting dark, and asked if she had any bikes, and she said that she thought there was an old scooter lying around and a little rusty BMX in a field, and she got her son to drive it over to us on his quad bike and trailer, and bought this. It was a sort of like one of those micro scooters, but it had foam wheels, from what I remember, which made it, it was slower than walking. It was really odd. And then this little rusty BMX that had no brakes. But weirdly, getting those. It changed our sort of, because if you're planning a Land's End to John O'Groats trip, you sort of think about needing the best bike available, the fastest, sleekest, most lightweight thing. But having walked for most of the day, and the fact that we didn't have bikes, getting a scooter and a rusty BMX just changed our whole perspective of sort of technology in bikes, because it wasn't about a bike. It was just about having something that got us from A to B quicker than it did before. With the case of the scooter, only marginally quicker, but they technically were wheeled transport and stuff. And it was just really bizarre, sort of having this appreciation for these things. They'd literally been discarded in a field for years with grass growing through them, but to us they sort of felt like the best thing ever. So we had those for the rest of that day, and then most of the next day, and then we met this absolute legend called Roger Badcock in a little village in Cornwall, and he's had a sort of side project, a hobby basically of doing up old bikes and then sort of rehoming them. And we turned up with our rusty BMX and scooter in the hope that, sort of naively thinking we might be able to swap them. And we explained our challenge, and he looked at these two rusty pieces of crap that we had and didn't seem at first to be that sort of interested. But then he too sort of got the enthusiasm for our challenge and stuff, and looked at the parts and looked at the bikes and thought, actually, maybe there's a few parts that might be useful. And he had a couple of bikes. One was a Pink Girls mountain bike that was he'd had for ages and had no home for, just needed a bit of oil and tires inflating. And then a junior 5-speed racing bike, which was a tiny little road bike called the Falcon. And so he kindly gave us those in exchange for our scooter and BMX. And those became compared to the scooter and BMX, these were just like proper sort of Tour de France style things. I mean, you could actually cover distance on those. And so without putting in spoilers, I became quite attached to the Falcon, which I still actually have in my shed outside. It's hanging rusting on the wall. And so those bikes took us all the way to Bath, the two of them. And then Ben eventually got tired of the Pink Girls mountain bike, and we went to the police station in Bath, and they exchanged it. All bikes that are stolen and unclaimed go off. I think they get sent to Africa. And so the Pink Girls mountain bike would have had a great job in Africa. So that we swapped that with a bigger touring bike that Ben took all the way to John and Greg's, which was far too big for him. But he got quite snobby about his bikes and wanted the best one ever, and found this bike that was then so big that he could hardly reach the pedals. But that was his own fault for being greedy. So yeah, so the bikes were we had 5 different modes of transport plus our feet in total, which was surprisingly few. I mean, I think we thought we were going to, be having to swap bikes if they, fall apart at every instant. And we
yeah, so that's something that I found so interesting from your trip. It wasn't just the generosity, but it was the sheer amount of different characters that you met. Because if you were to tell someone, go and stand at the bottom of Great Britain with no money and no bicycles, and you have to acquire a bike, a lot of people would think that's never going to happen. That might take several days. And yet by the end of the second day, you were already upgrading your bicycle. So you went through 2 bikes in the first 2 days that you managed to blag for free. And then by the time you got to Bath, which is like 20-25% of the way up the UK, you were upgrading onto a 3rd bike. So it really was quite easy for you to get your hands on these free bikes. Like even going to the police station and asking them for a stolen bike, like that's a really good blag in and of itself.
The police station, I think that was Ben's idea, and he was very inspired with that because he was very keen to upgrade his bike. I think we always assumed that I don't think we would have started the trip if we didn't think that getting the bikes would be possible, because that's obviously the difference between walking the whole length thing, which is not going to be done in 3 weeks, to actually getting there in less than 3 weeks. And I think it's because our expectations were so much lower. If we sort of set off and thought, oh, do you think there's any chance of us getting carbon fiber road bikes, state of the art, then no, that's very unlikely. And whereas if you think, is there a chance we'll be able to get a rusty bike that's got flat tires that no one's looked at in years, then yeah, I mean I've got a couple of kids' bikes in my garage that sitting rusting away and stuff that I'm meaning to get rid of and stuff. So I think we were always quite hopeful that would be possible, and it's all to do with our expectations of what we wanted. We weren't after anything fancy. We were just after something that would help us cover the distance.
It was an extremely optimistic idea for an adventure, wasn't it?
Naive, probably. Yeah. I don't. Do you know Ross Edgley? He's the guy that swam around the coast of Britain and stuff.
Yeah.
He's got a particular phrase of his that I really like. He says, "You have to be naive enough to start and stubborn enough to finish." Which that's what he applies to his adventures. And I think I love that, and I love that sort of attitude of just being naive enough to start something, but then stubborn enough to see it through the end. And that's exactly what our trip was and stuff. It was a silly idea, which we thought was possible, but it is about optimism and stuff. So my fourth book, I think, the first book I wanted to write was a sort of US travelogue. I was a fan of Bill Bryson growing up and spent 9 months driving around America and kept a diary and sort of thought, I'll write a book when I get back. And then I got back from the trip with my diary and thought, who's going to want to read a book that I wrote and stuff? So I put it in a cupboard and never looked at it again, which then became my fourth book. But that was a similar trip. A friend and I went to America and we bought a minivan for $800 without even starting the engine. We saw an advert in upstate New York for an old minivan that fitted our budget, and it was 30 miles or something like that from where we were. And there were no buses there, so it took us 2 days to walk to this place just to look at this advert that we'd seen in a newspaper. And we walked there. There was no intention of us not buying it because we needed a car to do our road trip. And we got there and we did a deal with them, got a bit knocked off, and just paid the money. We genuinely hadn't even turned the ignition on, which is completely stupid and very naive. But it was just I suppose I do have that sort of optimistic streak to thinking, it will all turn out in the end okay. So we bought this minivan, and then 2 days later, the transmission failed catastrophically on one of the busiest interstates in America, and it cost us something like $3,000 to get it fixed. So my optimism didn't really pay off on that occasion, but things did turn out okay in the end. We were just a little bit short of cash.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like Ross Edgley said, naive enough to start and stubborn enough to finish, because even when things don't go well, they usually turn out to be the best stories and experiences anyway. When you go on a mission that's so ridiculous and everything goes wrong and it's horrific at the time, but you laugh about it afterwards, and you don't have those experiences if you plan too rigorously.
Absolutely, yeah. The easier life is sometimes the more boring it is and stuff. And yeah, like you say, you look back on those occasions where you've gone through, tough times and adversity and stuff, and those are things not only that make you tougher and sort of strengthen your character. They're just, it's good to look back on and remember those sort of experiences that you've been through. So yeah.
Yeah, well, just to give you, I wasn't planning on mentioning this. Actually, what I will say, you said you were a fan of Bill Bryson. I didn't include it in my notes for this conversation, but I guessed that you were a fan of Bill Bryson. I was going to ask you what writing you were into and if you had any inspirations. And I thought, I'm getting some Bill Bryson vibes from this guy. He's writing really witty, in-depth book, and it's all about the characters he meets and the stories of the day and his own humorous perception. The book really did have a Bill Bryson feel to it, actually, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Poor man's Bill Bryson. Yeah, and I was a fan growing up. In fact, I got quite into travelogues. We listened to, when I was probably, 11 or 12, we listened to a cassette audiobook of Mark Wallington, I think his name is. He wrote this book called 500 Mile Walkies, which is about, he walks the Southwest Coast Path with his dog. It's a very funny book, and I can remember that as a child thinking, this sounds amazing. This is the guy. And at the time, I didn't ever sort of think, I want to write that sort of thing. I just was very inspired by that style of narrative, I guess. But yeah, it never really planned to be a career for me, but that seems to be where I've ended up.
Well, likewise, I was also inspired by Bill Bryson growing up, and I'm inspired by your book as well. I'll tell you quickly, if it's okay, about an adventure I went on, which was equally ridiculous and well, not quite as ridiculous actually, but it was a ridiculous adventure, and I'll give you some context for why I enjoyed the book so much. I was a professional wrestler for 6 or 7 years, the like WWE type of wrestling, And
I've seen some of your videos, Seb.
Oh, have you?
I'm seriously impressed. I think it's incredible.
Well, when I stopped doing that, I was a bit sad because I was injured. There was various other reasons I had to stop, and I booked a one-way flight to Thailand on a little bit of I was 25, I think, and it was a little bit of a sort of like run away, get me out of here sort of situation, go on a mission. And I booked it so last minute, I didn't actually have a rucksack or a traveling bag. So I put all my belongings into a Morrison's bag for life. And I flew to Thailand with just like a Morrison's bag for life with very few items in it. I stopped off in Dublin on the way as a random stopover. I had to go to Dublin first. And yeah, acquired a map of Dublin for my Morrison's carrier bag, which I proceeded to carry around Thailand, Southeast Asia for 3.5 months. A pointless map of Dublin was one of my like 6 possessions. But anyway, I got to Bangkok and everyone thought it was hilarious that I had this plastic bag. So obviously was like drinking and meeting loads of people and just kind of getting into that Thailand state of mind. And after about a week, I was getting so much like admiration for my plastic bag. I thought I'll hang on to it for a bit because obviously my plan had been to buy a rucksack when I got there. Anyway, I had this most amazing experience traveling and I could tell you so many funny stories from that trip. But just as it turned out, like 3 months later, I'm still there and I've still just got this Morrison's bag and I'm performing life-saving surgery on it with like string and gaffer tape. It was basically a big ball of gaffer tape by the end of it. And one night I was walking through an alleyway quite pissed and there was a pink mop. And I saw it and I was like, oh my God, I had this brainwave. And I like snapped the mop in half. And then I bought a load of string from the 7-Eleven. And I tied the pink mop to the plastic bag so it was over my shoulder like Dick Whittington. Right. So I had this like thing like that. And then I proceeded to hitchhike half of Thailand with I spent like 10 days on the road. I covered about 700 or 800 miles with just wandering along. I was wearing Angry Bird slippers, yellow Angry Bird slippers, a cowboy hat, a Stars and Stripes bandana, I think, at points. And then, yeah, like a pink mop over my shoulder with a plastic bag tied to the end of it. And yeah, like it was a pretty epic experience. They don't, that doesn't mean hitchhiking in Thailand. So on the first day, I realized quite quickly, I'm standing on the side of the road looking like an absolute state, like hairy, on my own, plastic bag over my shoulder, going like that. And people are literally driving past going beep, 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 and giving me a thumbs up and smiling. They like literally thought I was on the side of the road trying to give them thumbs up. So I had to develop this new tactic of like jumping into the middle of the road, almost in the middle of the road and going like that, like that, because that means like, please, please, thank you. So I had to like try and get it. And then that's when I started getting lifts. But yeah. So like, that's just a little bit of context about why your book like tickles my pickle so much. Cause I love stuff like that.
When's your book coming out? That sounds way better than mine.
It's definitely not better than yours. Cause I had money and I didn't have to blag a free accommodation.
We didn't have a bag for life like that. Wicked style mop. Seriously, I would read that. That sounds awesome. I love that. Love the sound of that adventure.
Well, amazing. maybe I will have to get that written down at some point. But anyway, let's get back to this mission because this is the mission that we're here to talk about. But I just wanted to share that with you because, like, we're talking about Bill Bryson inspiring you, and like your book inspired me, and it's just like I think it takes a certain type of person to be up for doing this sort of thing, doesn't it? Because some people just don't understand it, do they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just going back to the sort of optimism and open-mindedness, I think, that's obviously important. And I think lots of people, if you ask them, would probably want to try something like that. It's having, it goes back to making that sort of commitment, because I think it had been discussed a few times before about doing this trip and stuff. And it wasn't until Ben and I were in a pub and had a few beers that we actually sort of committed to it. And then once it's sort of out there and you've agreed with each other, and then you wake up the next day and you sort of realize what you've said and then decide to sort of go through with it. And then literally, a matter of days later, we decided to embark on it. That's the trickiest bit. It's committing to something is the hardest stage. So the last few years, I've sort of my wife and I've taken part in various or organized events, various different sort of ultra marathons and 10K swims and big bike rides and challenges like that. But these are all most of them are sort of organized events. We do a lot of sort of self-supported stuff as well. But the idea then is that by signing up to something, you're making a commitment with yourself to take on these things, which makes it. That's why people sign up to 10Ks and marathons and stuff, because it's so much easier if you've got a formal commitment with yourself by signing up. So that's the Land's End to John O'Groats trip happened because we'd sort of had an idea that lots of people might sort of suggest and then never happened. But then we just had the balls to sort of follow it through. And I think that was just because of the fact there was two of us, we were able to hold each other accountable and sort of agree, we've decided to do this, let's do it, kind of thing. There's lots of, I've had various other sort of ideas that that I haven't had the courage to do and stuff, but maybe one day. But yeah, it's having that idea and then just committing to it. That's the important thing, because taking those first steps is the hardest bit. And, but once you're in the journey, it all sort of tends to unfold quite nicely. It's the signing up is the hardest bit.
Yeah, 100%. Because so many people, and this even applies to myself, and as you said, it applies to you. You've got ideas of things that you haven't done yet that you hope to do. Like, everyone has that tendency to say, I'd love to do that one day. I'd love to do that one day. Maybe next year, maybe the year after. And that their intentions are completely genuine. They feel it, they feel like, you know what? I would like to do that thing. I would like to one day run a marathon. I would like to one day try some crazy adventure, like penniless adventure. And they genuinely feel it. But if you were to say to them, so do it now, or do it next week, or do it next month, or work out a time that you can take off work in 6 months and actually book that time off work, that's when the excuses start coming in. And it starts to get difficult. The conviction to carry things out, as you say, is difficult.
I loved your 100 days of wild swimming video. I thought that was fantastic. I'm really keen. I swim all year round as well. I've never done 100 days straight. I try to swim all year round at least twice a week or something. But just the fact that you had the discussion with friends and then committed, set up a WhatsApp group, and then you're suddenly all in it and stuff, which I think that's going back to the same thing. That's sort of having that commitment and the companionship to sort of have almost like an accountability partner, so to sort of go through it. But yeah, I thought your swimming video was fantastic, and I agreed with all of your benefits. Are you still swimming?
Yeah. I'm not swimming really, but I'm having cold showers still.
Doing the cold showers.
I'm doing the cold showers.
I find cold showers harder than jumping in a freezing cold lake for some reason, because it's so easy to step out of a shower or turn the temperature dial. You have to be very disciplined to sort of stay. Whereas once you've actually jumped into cold water, you're there and stuff, and it's the hard bit's done.
I agree. The easier thing about there's obviously the plus. Going in nature is nice. It's good for you. It's nice to be out in a lake or in the sea somewhere. That's more sort of nourishing in a way, on a kind of personal, spiritual basis, than having a cold shower. The other disadvantage to having a cold shower, which I'm sure you've experienced, is the water. Like, once you get into the lake or the sea, you're submerged. Right? So you can be up to your neck and your whole body is cold. Whereas in the shower, your chest is freezing cold, and then you move around a bit, and then it's your shoulder, and then it's your back. And there's never a point where it's finished. It's kind of the coldness is dancing around on your skin a little bit.
It prolongs the pain, doesn't it, over a longer,
Yeah, exactly. And but I would say the advantage is, like, I live in the center of Bristol, so I'm not really close to any bodies of water. So especially in the winter, when I only go in like Clevedon Marine Lake for about 3 minutes at a time, it's not worth the hour-long round trip, really. Whereas with the cold shower, there's no excuse. So every day, I don't do just cold. I just do like 60 to 90 seconds at the end of a warm shower, and I do that every day. So
okay, I was going to say, so is that the way to do it? So normal shower and then end with the cold? Is that?
I think so. I mean, obviously, if you want to be hardcore, you can build up to just, I've got a mate that just has 5-minute cold showers. So it's up to you how much cold water you want. But I would say if you want to just keep the habit, because obviously there's always the risk of trying to make yourself do too much and then failing completely, isn't there? So for me personally, the way that I keep the habit is I have a hot shower, because I don't feel like I clean myself properly otherwise. Do you know what I mean? I want to get that hot water and like proper scrub it off. But then my habit that I've managed to keep for 18 months now is like 60 to 90 seconds at the end. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, you've inspired me. I'll have a cold shower after this.
Do it. But that is a good thing though, isn't it? Because like, if I had to do it every day, I probably, like, without the warm water, I probably would have stopped doing it. It's just the fact that it's like, oh, come on, it's just a bit at the end. You can do it, And it's much better than a coffee.
It's great and not only for the health benefits. I think it's great as a sort of almost like form of mindfulness. Like, I defy anyone to get in the cold shower, jump in the sea, and be able to think about anything else other than that moment. It's because it can be that unpleasant. Your mind can't be anywhere else, can it? Really, other than
100%. It completely resets you. I'm early into my long form conversation career. It's still a skill set that I'm building, just like learning how to speak to people, how to interview people, how to keep the conversation flowing. And I find myself having these conversations that go absolutely all over the place and really stray from the original point. And I can't decide whether that means I'm doing well at my job or bad at my job, because it means that the conversation's flowing. Like, we're talking about cold showers, I'm telling you about Thailand, but then equally there's so much stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, which we're not speaking about. So I don't know, maybe I need to learn at being a bit more concise with my bullet points.
No, I think it's perfect. So I think if you're too scripted and stuff, I've listened to some podcasts and stuff where they'll ask a question, the person will give a really good answer, and then the interviewer will just move straight on to the next question, won't even sort of respond. So no, I think I love conversations that just go all over the place and stuff. We can go back to your questions at any point.
Let's go back to my questions now, because as much as I'm
Cool.
enjoying talking to you, I think this is going to last 4 or 5 hours. I really want to know some more things about your trip. So, okay. Okay, you met a lot of memorable characters on your trip. You found yourself in some ridiculous sleeping situations. You had some unbelievable blags. Like, I want to know about all of this. So, like, what was the most ridiculous sleeping situation that you found yourself in? Because you didn't spend a night on the streets. You managed to blag somewhere to stay every single night. What do you think is the most memorable?
Our first night, probably, because I think that's finding somewhere to sleep was the bit we were most worried about, because we were sort of fairly hopeful we could get clothes and food and maybe bikes, but until we actually had a roof over our head at night, we didn't know whether that was possible. So that would been always been our biggest fear. And you can go a certain amount of time without food and stuff, but if we were going to do this trip successfully, we did need places to stay. So we got where we got the scooter and BMX, we got a tip off of another farmer that might allow us to sleep in a barn. And so by this point it was dark, and so we turned up on his doorstep, and he didn't look too pleased to see us, but because we'd almost sort of had a referral from a friend of his, he felt sort of obliged to help us out. And he was lovely in there. Once he sort of met us, I think he was a bit sort of dubious of the fact that we were sort of turning up on his doorstep late at night, but he showed us around to the a barn behind his farm with a prize-winning bull named Surprise in the neighbouring pen, and they lent us a couple of sleeping bags and told us to make a bed on the straw, and so we lay down there on the straw with these sleeping bags, one of which they let us keep, which was very kind of us. So we had one sleeping bag which we kept with us for the rest of the trip, and then this bull literally in a pen bashing its head against this metal fence all night. Oh, in fact, we had this towards you'll probably know better than me, towards the end of the first day, because we had acquired various possessions, we needed something to put the things in, and one Coast Guard, a guy named Les, gave Ben a pair of tracksuit bottoms and gave us a rucksack, which I still use to this day, still a regular rucksack. And then we met another lady in the street and asked her if she had a spare bag or anything. And she just relatively recently won a picnic set in a raffle or something like that. She'd acquired this picnic set, and it was one of those picnic sets that were in a rucksack. And it'd been completely unused. So she gave us that, and it was full of, it had 6 plates, 6 bowls, 6 knives, forks. You know what a picnic set looks like. So anyway, it's a full set within a rucksack. And we got to our accommodation on the straw, and we managed to acquire some food. There was a wedding that happened at the pub down the road, and the caterer at the pub sort of told us to go and wait out back, and he would supply us with some food. And he brought this huge ice cream container full of, I think it was sliced turkey or something, and bread and all sorts of stuff. So we were very well fed. And we took that back, and we decided we did to have a plate. So Ben cracked open his picnic set, but everything was individually wrapped, and we felt bad about sort of using stuff. So we just sort of unwrapped like one knife, which we then used for the trip, because we thought we didn't want to sort of take advantage of this picnic set we got. We thought we'll pass it on somewhere, and then weirdly, we never did. So it's a bit like you and your Morrison's bag for life. We never managed to upgrade the picnic set. So we carried this entire picnic set all the way to John O'Groats with 5 of the 6 utensils of everyone unopened still in their planet, which was completely ridiculous, because it took up at least half of the rucksack. just all of these picking things, but we still only used the one knife we needed and stuff. So that was absolutely ridiculous. And
Yeah.
I don't know. Ben kept that. I don't know what happened to that. I'm hoping he found a home for it somewhere.
That's absolutely hilarious. And I could, like I said, as you know from the story I told you, I can really relate to that. There's something about the random objects you acquire on these missions that you get a sort of attachment to them. They become part of your
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny. Fair play. Okay, so yeah, the most ridiculous sleeping situation was the night in the barn with the prize bull called Surprise. There were some other ones in your book. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into them all, but some of my favorites were the fact that you actually blagged rooms in hotels. That's really quite impressive to be able to just walk into a hotel. On each day, was your action plan, did you think it would be easier to get a free room in a hotel or a B&B than it would be to ask a random stranger, or did you work out that if you were going to try and get anything, you might as well get a nice room in a hotel and a B&B rather than someone's floor?
It wasn't really. It wasn't anything to do with trying to get the nicest accommodation possible. It was more to do with not wanting to be a burden on people. We felt it was going into a hotel and asking if they had a spare room was not putting them out, because in most cases the staff there didn't own the hotel and it wasn't going to be sort of financially putting them out, and it was a room that potentially hadn't been cleaned or was there anyway. Whereas knocking on someone's door, you're could potentially be a real burden to that thing. So from our point, it was nothing to do with the standard of accommodation, because at the end of the day, every accommodation felt very similar. It was just a bed, because we were always so wrecked and tired by the end of the day. We just somewhere just to rest the head and get a bit of sleep. So it didn't matter to us whether we were on a student's floor or in a tent or in a hotel. It was just the times where we did manage to get a room in a hotel or a bed and breakfast was purely just because we felt like it was almost a sort of less intrusive option, and we tried to be as little burden as possible on people.
What percentage of hotels and B&Bs like that you asked said yes? So on any given day, when you were wandering around a town asking for somewhere to stay, what percentage? How many places did you have to ask before somewhere actually said yes?
I can't remember. I mean, most of the places we stayed at until we got sort of further north, we were quite sort of rural areas. So we're a lot of the places didn't have hotels anyway. We would be staying sort of in quite random places. We did get rejections, but it was always very polite. I mean, during the whole course of the trip, we hardly had anybody sort of being rude to us. And the rare occasions they were, we decided it was our own arrogance, or like we'd perhaps got a bit sort of complacent. And so there was one occasion where Ben he'd left his water somewhere or whatever. So rather than we'd found some old bottles we were just filling up at outside taps or in public toilets or whatever, and he didn't have any water, so just decided he would just go into a shop and ask for a bottle of water, and went in and got a lot of abuse from this shopkeeper. Quite rightly, he was sort of saying that he's not going to support our holiday and stuff. And I think that was a sort of wake up call for both of us, that we'd perhaps got a little bit too complacent and shouldn't expect anything from anyone and stuff. So from then on, we kept the same bottle of water, which we just sort of refilled at every occasion and things. And just trying our best, because I mean, at the end of the day, we were sort of being subsidized for a bit of a holiday, because it was a jolly and stuff. So we want to minimize the burden and the effect on people.
It's interesting actually that he was confident enough that he thought that he could go into the shop and buy the bottle of water in the first place, because something that I've mentioned a couple of times in this conversation that I really got a sense of when reading the book is that for you to basically blag food, blag accommodation, blag clothes, it did seem far more achievable than I would have guessed. How did that process feel like with you? Did you become quite confident at it as the trip went on? Because at the start, I imagine there was nerves and anxiety about asking for things for free. But when you started getting such positive responses from people, and each day, like, you found that actually it wasn't as hard as one might have expected. Did you get kind of more confident, a bit more of a swagger in your step, a bit like you would see a shop and you're like, I reckon I can get something for free out of that place?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we did. So, I mean, like the first instance of everything. So the first food, the first clothes, the first accommodation was always the hardest. So we were surprised that we got a t-shirt within a couple of minutes. So that it took the fear out of getting clothing. We then thought, oh, there's a good chance we'll be fully clothed. And then the first food we got, I think, was in the airport. There's an airport near Land's End, and we got a bacon sandwich. I think that's right. We got a bacon sandwich all the flights were delayed, and there was some really lovely customers who were waiting for delayed flights. They gave us some food as well, banana or something like that. And so that was, it was like, wow, it is possible to get food for free. And then the first night's accommodation. So after you've crossed each of those barriers, it did sort of cross off the fear element for that. And I suppose we did perhaps get more confident throughout. But it didn't make it any easier, to be honest. I mean, even on the very last night, we were in the middle of nowhere, and it got dark, and we were trying to find accommodation, and we'd avoided knocking on people's doors for days, and especially we never knocked on people's doors when it was dark. But we were at this village. So this was on day 18 or whatever. We were in the middle of nowhere on quite a busy road up near John O'Groats, and it was dark, and we did have to start knocking on doors. And one occasion you could tell the people in, but they didn't want to answer, and I don't blame them at all. I wouldn't have, if I lived where they did, there's people knocking on the door at 9 o'clock at night. So yeah, we perhaps did get more confident, but it didn't make it necessarily easier or more enjoyable. There was still obviously that sort of slight guilt factor. Depending on who you ask. I mean, a lot of people were desperate to go out of their way to help us and stuff, and so we're obviously, incredibly grateful on those occasions too.
What do you think was the biggest blag of the entire trip? What was the thing that you blagged, whether it be in terms of food? I don't know whether my use of the word blag here is right. I mean, I could say politely requested.
I think blag's fair. It's not a great word, but I think it's probably fair. I guess.
Yeah.
I think the canal boat was probably an entire canal boat for us for the night was probably hard to beat. We were running out of options, and there was no Ellesmere somewhere, and there was quite a sort of rural area, and we came across this sort of narrowboat marina, and the guy there, Neil, we knocked on the door of his office, and initially he was I think we disturbed his dinner, and he was very reluctant to sort of help out. But then we explained the situation, and he thought it sounded very amusing, and we had a few inquiries to do to see if there was any accommodation available. And then he emerged from the door a few minutes later. Sorry, my dog's just
no worries.
Excited.
Okay.
And then he led us round to they have these hire boats, and he gave us like a sort of 6-berth canal boat for the night, which was bigger than the house I was living in and stuff. Yeah, really, really luxury. That was a fantastic night. So I suppose that was probably the single. But then weirdly, that was, although that was extravagant for us, that was no sort of financial burden for the guy or anything, because it was just a boat that was there in the marina. But there was huge acts of generosity that we didn't expect it. But when we were in Lancaster doing our busking, so we were just singing Christmas carols randomly in September, and this student, he was wearing his school uniform with his tie down, came out. I think he'd been in Poundland or the pound shop, and came out with a carrier bag that was overflowing with crisps and biscuits and sweets and everything. And he'd seen our sign and watched us singing in amusement. And so this was just like a scruffy school kid that decided to go and spend all his money in the pound shop and give it to us. He did insist that we sing a-ha's "Take on Me" while he filmed us on his phone in exchange for this bag. So he held it tantalizingly there and made us sing. So we were there. He had the bag, his phone, and the bag there on the other side of the camera, and made us sing in exchange for it. And thankfully, I've had a few emails from people saying, "Is that available?" I was terrified that would end up on YouTube, but thankfully I've never seen it. So if you're watching, Bob, I think your name was, please, I hope you've deleted it. Never let it see the light of day.
It might be sitting in the abyss of YouTube somewhere, buried under hundreds of thousands of videos. Maybe one day it will emerge.
Hopefully not. No one wants to see that.
So yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so the most ridiculous sleeping situation was the night in the barn with the bull. The biggest blag of the entire trip, you think probably it was the night on the canal boat. It's really funny actually when I was reading your book because Ben was persuading you, wasn't he, to ask the guy at the marina if you could sleep on a boat, and you weren't sure, I don't think, and I think it was Ben that wanted to do it. I don't know if I
Yeah,
think that's correct.
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, but
Yeah, and
Ben was slightly more, well, not slightly more. Ben was a lot more confident than I was in sort of perhaps pushing the boundaries a little bit. I think it's sort of just to make our experience different. Because if we got the sort of into a repetitive nature of exactly the same thing happening, so I think that to add a bit of variety just made it more of an adventure for us. So, I mean, we didn't need to be on a canal, but we could have, ended up in sleeping in someone's barn or on someone's floor or anywhere. But canal boat was just a sort of a new dimension to the trip and just gave us it added to the variety of it. It was
yeah,
great.
the cool thing about the canal boat is that you wrote in the book saying that you were expecting to just sleep on any old scrotty little boat. Like you didn't think it would be this amazingly well equipped, like beautiful, like little bungalow. You thought it might just be sort of like a dirty old boat that you were just lucky enough to
Yeah,
sleep in,
yeah,
but it was like a proper little apartment, wasn't it?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's
With some.
tempting. Go on, sorry.
No, go on. No, go on.
Well, it's tempting if I mean, I was thinking when I was reading your book, I was thinking if I do this mission, I'll just have to take this book with me and just try and follow the footsteps. Like, okay, there's an old man with wellies 2 miles in from Land's End. There's a good, but obviously that wouldn't be the right way to do it. But yeah, it's quite funny. What was your best moment of the entire trip? Like, what was your favorite? What's actually? I'll tell you what. That's two separate questions. What was your favorite story? The story that you tell the most, the thing that like springs to mind immediately for you as a sort of a tale from the trip that you like to share with people?
Well, I suppose the thing that comes up most is my bike, the Falcon. My sort of relationship with that. That's the most common question I get is people saying, "What happened to the Falcon? Do you still have it?" Because that was almost like a sort of third character in the book. It was sort of it was awful. It had 5 gears, but most of those gears didn't work. We acquired our first pump. We got a flat tire in Wales. We crossed briefly into Wales and played tire, but we didn't get our first pump till we were in Scotland, I think. Um, so most of the way we had semi flat tires, but this bike was awful. At one point, I was driving along a road, and there was a pothole, and I pulled up on the handlebars to hop over this pothole. And the front wheel carried on rolling down the road, disconnected from the bike, and then the front forks hit the
Oh,
ground.
mate.
Thankfully, I was going slowly at the time, but it was dreadful. But I became quite attached to it, and I sort of saw it as a sort of personal challenge to try and get this bike all the way to John O'Groats. But as far as memorable moments go, um, the one that it's only literally just popped into mind, which I think it's quite symbolic of the trip, our sort of self-imposed rules and the kindness. We were up in Scotland, up near above Glencoe on some mountain pass, and it was we'd gone up this sort of windy switchbacks road to the top, and there was a set of traffic lights there, and they were doing some roadworks on the descent, which is this long descent down into, I can't remember whether this was before Glencoe or after Glencoe, and the road was closed down to one lane, and we were badly lit. We'd been wearing bin bags. This a bagpipe player we met it told us we were going to. They might as well be body bags, and because he was right. We were really poorly lit and poorly dressed. So we were on this mountain pass, and the guy with the high vis vest said, "Sorry, you're not going to be able to cycle down here. It's too dangerous dressed like that." And he said, I'll put your bikes in the back of the van, and we'll drive you down." And Ben was like, "Oh, fantastic!" I think it was sort of 2 mile down the mountain. Ben was like, "Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks, mate. That's really really kind of you." And I sort of hesitated, and then sort of said, "Oh, really sorry to be like, I don't mean to be pernickety, but we're cycling round into John O'Groats, and I know that it's a safety issue, but if you drive us down the mountain, then technically we haven't cycled the whole way." And so I was trying to be polite as I could, and so thinking this guy was going to think, what is this guy playing at? But he totally understood it and said, "No, you're right, you're right." And then so he had to sort of think, because he thought he didn't want us to cycle down the mountain because it was so dangerous. and we couldn't drive down. So he said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll radio the guy at the bottom, and we'll put both traffic lights on red, and we'll stop all the traffic on the entire mountain, and you can cycle down." And so Ben was like, "Oh, fine. I suppose you have to cycle." And so they did that. They put both traffic lights on red, and we had the entire mountain descent to ourselves, which was just fantastic because the guy sort of was able to see the trip, what it was, and knew how important it was that we cycled every inch of the way. We weren't contending with our traffic, and then we got to the bottom, and there was, dozens and dozens of cars backed up that sort of gave us evil glares as we passed. But Ben, even Ben was delighted and knew that we'd made the right decision. So yeah, just little things like that where you're on the mountain pass in the middle of Scotland, and you experience people's kindness and stuff, and all for sort of fairly sort of selfish reasons, just about doing our own adventure. But it was very heartwarming.
That's an amazing story. I absolutely love that. It must have been such an amazing feeling cruising down that mountain in your bin bag, knowing that there was no traffic. And was there many cars queued up when you got down to the bottom?
I forgot to add something. He actually gave us 2 high-vis vests.
Did he?
For the descent, which we then had to hand in to the person at the bottom. Yeah. So he was
cool.
Health and safety was paramount for him. So he said, "Put these on, give them to my colleague at the bottom." So yeah, we did that.
What a guy. What a guy. That's a really cool story. I like that. What would you say, just to wrap things up, I'd like to know, like, what was the lowest point of the trip and then the highest point afterwards?
Lowest point. Oh, good question. Yeah, there was some just long days where we sort of thought we expected to be in a town by a certain, but turning up in Carlisle actually ended up being the one of the highest and lowest points within the space of an hour. So we turned up, and that was probably, going back to your previous questions about rejections from hotels, that was the one place where we got a series of rejections, one after the other. Because weirdly, finding somewhere to stay when you're in a city centre was far harder than being in sort of rural areas and stuff. So despite the fact that there were lots of hotels, they were all either booked or just reluctant to give us anywhere and stuff. So we got a lot of rejections there, and then we decided to go to a bar and ask around, and then this guy we were feeling pretty sort of nervous because we were sort of almost in Scotland, so we sort of felt like the trip was the majority of, although our initial thought was once we're in Scotland it'll be easy, but then if you look at a map and realize Scotland's like at least as long as England, so anyway, we turned up at this walkabout Australian bar, and sort of we were asking some students if they knew anywhere to stay, and then this very broad Scottish accent told us to sit down, and first of all he said, "You can come and stay at my house," and he was a little bit drunk, and so we said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely sure." And he bought us several beers, and there's this guy called, in the book, I think I call him Ronnie. I've since changed his name to, his actual name is Nori. I changed his name for the book, and the photo didn't appear in the book because having read the book, you'll realise that some of the stories he says are a bit controversial. So I changed his name, but I've now changed it back because I realised that he would I've since found out that he passed away a few years ago, and he was very keen to share his stories. So I've now added his photo to current editions of the book so that people can see him. So basically, it's this quite a character. He claimed to be a sort of former hitman in a previous life, and literally just that day had a terminal cancer diagnosis at the doctors, and so decided he wanted to pass on some sort of goodness basically to us. And so he felt like it was almost like a sort of serendipitous moment that he'd bump into 2 needy people in a pub. And so he bought us beers and burgers and chips, and we went back to his flat and had quite a sort of terrifying night on his floor after he'd told us all these stories about being a former hitman. But yeah, so that night, so we'd gone from countless sort of rejections in Carlisle city centre to then just meeting one of the biggest characters of the trip, who was one of the most memorable people we met, and someone a character that will stay with me forever.
Yeah, I love that story from the book. I wanted to ask you the most memorable person you met on the trip, and I was fairly certain that would be the man. he bought you a load of beer, bought you a load of whiskey, and then you went back to his house and you were asleep on the floor in the living room where he had a kind of small, modest collection of items, and then he fell asleep in the chair right next to you guys. So you were just sort of sleeping in this room with this random old bloke you met in the pub.
And he was very drunk, and and he'd been telling us these stories, and then he literally fell asleep in this chair and kept sort of moving in the night. So Ben and I just lay sort of nervously on his floor. And thankfully, he got up in the night and went back to his bedroom. And then when he woke in the morning, he was just like a different person, no sign of a hangover. He gave us a coffee, which he sort of topped up with some Baileys, I think, in the morning. Absolute character. There was some audiobooks he was trying to get hold of, which I sent him after the trip. And then we exchanged letters a few times afterwards. And then I hadn't heard from him in a while. And I got in contact, so sent a letter and had a letter back maybe 3 years or so after the trip, saying that he'd died in a hospice, which was very sad. But he had a big impact on both of us in the 12 hours we spent with him. So real character.
That's special, isn't it? It is special when you go on these adventures and these missions and you come across people and you kind of bond with them, or you have a connection with them, or there's something that resonates with you about that person, that they just stay in your memories forever, like a real...
Absolutely. And with people like that, it was nice to feel, because obviously through the trip people were giving us stuff, so it was really nice on the occasions where we felt like we were giving something to them as well. And I think with Nori, we definitely felt like he was getting something out of the experience. I think he really enjoyed our company and the fact that he was able to help us out, when he was in a real time of need and stuff. So it felt like it was, any occasion where it felt like we were giving something back and was obviously much more preferable.
Well, and I would actually say though that everyone that helped you, that they were getting something from it in a way, because even though it may not have felt that way when you were just getting free food or you were sleeping in a hotel room, I was thinking, what is people's motivation for helping you? Like, what is going on there that two random guys they'd never met would turn up, and then they would ask for, can we have some food, or could we stay here? We're trying to travel the length of Great Britain without spending any money. In that moment, what is someone's motivation for helping you? And it's because they want to be part of it. They want to be they're part of your journey.
Absolutely. It is that. But I think it's human instinct to want to help people. It's just, we often don't get the opportunity. And so our trip, at every occasion, people, I know it sounds a weird way of saying it, but we were giving people the opportunity to give and to be helpful. And I'm awful at asking for help and stuff. Like, never sort of ask people for money or favors and stuff like that. I feel really bad. But whenever people ask me to do anything, even just, can I give someone a lift somewhere or lend them something stuff, I'm always so keen to do that, because I think that's genuine sort of human mentality. I think people love to help others and stuff. And so this trip was just an opportunity. It was a quite sort of extreme opportunity, but it gave us this sort of option for people to display their generosity. And as it proved, the vast majority of people are just amazing and really keen to offer help when given that chance.
And I imagine in our current society, the way things are set up, because for the vast majority of human history, we didn't have a roof over our heads. We didn't always know where our next meal was going to come from, and survival was key. So probably for hundreds of thousands of years, helping each other and being helped was an integral part of the human experience. And yet now, because we all have our essential needs met, we all have homes and food. Well, not all of us, but like many of us have homes and foods and everything we need. Homes and food and everything we need. We are probably quite disconnected and detached from that basic human impulse of just wanting to help someone. So when two guys turn up out of nowhere and just say, we're doing this mission, can you help us? It probably awakens something quite deep within the human psyche, that desire to help that you mentioned, that we don't get in touch with enough these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. No, I think you said that perfectly.
That's really interesting. Yeah. However, not everyone was helpful to you. Do you reckon you might be able to tell me the story about when you were mugged by two deaf teenagers in St. Ives?
No, they weren't even teenagers. They were sort of like 8-year-olds. They were really young. maybe it makes it sound. Yeah. So we were. Oh, you'll remember what this more about than I do.
I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean,
We
I
were
don't
in.
remember all the details, but they just blagged your bikes off you, basically, didn't they? You were
Yeah.
jumping in the sea
Was
or
it?
something.
I don't know whether it was. I think it was. It was. We just decided we'd just ridden our bikes down the ramp into the water to have a swim and cool off, and then we were drying off and sort of we were on a bit of a high because we just had a swim in the sea. And we looked around and our scooter. It was just all it was a scooter and BMX. So they were
Okay.
literally the worst bikes in the world, and thought they were unstealable. Looked around and they'd gone, and we sort of there'd been these two boys, two deaf boys that had been hanging around, twins, I think, and they'd been hanging around. And we saw one of them, and we went and asked him where his brother was and if he'd seen our bikes, and he denied anything at all. And but it was clearly there was something going on, so we followed him, and he went round all the way around to like the next bay in St Ives, and sure enough, there was his brother with our trusty steeds. But yeah, that was another thing because we became so protective of them. They seriously were awful, but but we were so protective of them. And then when they suddenly went missing, we were determined to get them back because they were our only means of transport.
That's so
But we
funny.
actually
And
got
were they resistant to you getting them back? Did they play?
oh
Did they
very
play?
yeah.
Were they pretending to be innocent? Did they were they trying to stop you taking them or?
Yeah, they denied everything and said they definitely didn't have them. And when we pointed out, we saw one of them with a bike, and then they were sort of acting like it was just a coincidence and they must be theirs and stuff. Well, actually, coming to think of it, maybe they had been theirs initially, and maybe we were the ones that thieving these bikes off these two young kids.
It's such a funny thing.
But
Like
no, that was the thefts. That was a unique experience, and so all other interactions were very amicable and positive with everybody.
it's such a funny thing not knowing how to deal with like young kids or teenagers when they're being like blatantly unpleasant or rude. There's this nature reserve by my house which I walk around in this, like I'm a couple miles from the center of Bristol here, and there's this group of boys on this rope swing there, and they're probably only about 10 or 11, but there's like 10 of them, and they're all shouting and swearing and being like really, really boisterous. And I think to myself as I'm walking through them, I'm thinking like, what would I do if they all started like mouthing off at me now? Because I can't hit them. Do you know what I mean? What do you do if a group of like 10 really obnoxious like 12-year-olds start giving you a hard time? You don't know how to deal with it because you don't want to get in trouble
absolutely.
for like I wouldn't know how to deal with it if a 2 8-year-olds stole my
cry
bike.
And run home.
Just cry and run home. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really tricky trying to act cool, isn't it, in situations like that? And,
yeah. Another really funny story from the book is, can you tell me about the Mrs. Rogers rogering slip of the tongue?
Oh God. Well, this is a tricky one. This is like because there's a couple of names I changed in the book because just because I thought it was easier. But so the Mrs. Rogers instance, I couldn't change the name because the whole premise of the story is based on her name. So we turned up at this campsite near Glastonbury, and this kind lady called Mrs. Rogers, who is very well-to-do, respectable lady, kindly offered us a sort of outhouse that had a bed in it. And floor space, and by this point we had sleeping bag, and we had a couple of towels that we sort of used as makeshift blankets. So we were feeling really. I don't know whether I should be I don't think I've ever repeated this story out loud.
If you don't want to, we don't have to include it. No. It's all good.
No, I don't mind at all because there's a follow up which you won't know about, which I can,
okay.
Which I'll go on to. So we were. We settled into this room and stuff, and we were feeling quite sort of happy about it. And I just made the comment. We were walking to the top of the stairs to go down, and there was a nearby pub that we were going to see if we could get anything to eat. And as we walked across the room, I said, "Good old Mrs. Rogers." And Ben has this weird sort of like almost sort of Tourette style sort of mentality. Whenever there's any sort of inkling of making a humorous joke, he goes for it and stuff. Because he's a very funny guy, but sort of likes to make a joke whenever he can. So I said, "Good old Mrs. Rogers," and he said, but for no reason at all, he just said, "Yeah, I'm going to Roger her in the morning," just completely sort of out of nowhere. And then he froze, and I sort of thought, "What's wrong? Why has Ben just stopped at the top of the stairs?" And then followed his gaze, and Mrs. Rogers was standing at the bottom of these stairs that we were just about to descend, and Ben sort of like looked at me, just his face just went completely pale, and he was looking at me like, George, help, what please help, and looked back at Mrs. Rogers, and Mrs. Rogers then made some comments. She said, I just wanted to show you where the light switch was. And we were like, oh, okay, thank you. And Ben was, so we disappeared out there, and Ben was absolutely mortified and saying, do you think she heard me? And I was like, well, she must have heard you. She was standing at the right bottom of the stairs, and we had this sort of argument. So then, why on earth would you say something like that? And he was like, I don't know. I couldn't resist. So anyway, so this had been like playing on Ben's mind for the rest of the trip, basically, and it came up in conversation all the time, and even years after, I sort of Mrs. Rogers would get mentioned. And then I think it was 2 years ago, perhaps, I got this email out of the blue from someone with the surname Rogers, and I thought, oh God, and clicked on the link and had this really, really lovely email from Mrs. Rogers' daughter, who had read my book and recognised her mum in the book. So I'd been, as I say, I couldn't change the name because the way the conversation works is by putting the original name.
Sure,
So
yeah.
Mrs. Rogers had to stay, and I sort of hoped that she would just never see it. Well, when I wrote the book, I thought it would be read by a few friends and family. I didn't expect sort of strangers to read it. So it ended up in the book, and then I just didn't really think anything of it. So I got this email from Mrs. Rogers' daughter saying she'd read my book, recognised her mum, and she absolutely loved the book. And she told the whole story to her mum. Her mum's sort of still alive, so read the chapter to her. And her mum apparently found it very, very amusing. Thought it was very funny. And just for our peace of mind, her mum, Mrs. Rogers, had never heard anything apparently. So I passed this on to Ben, and so Ben can now sleep easy. Although the hard work's been now she does know, at least now that it's been in print.
I can't believe that her daughter read the book. What are the chances of that? That is absolutely hilarious. I was thinking as I read it.
Well, I did want, when the book sort of gained in popularity, it did cross my mind at one point that word might get back, because it mentions the name of the campsite and stuff. So people would have perhaps, I thought, word will eventually get back to her, but I wasn't expecting her daughter to read it. But thankfully, she was very polite, and
that's amazing. I'm glad that I mentioned that, because it's really, really cool to hear the end of that story, because it was such a funny part of the book. So it's cool to hear that. Because I was thinking when I read it that maybe she might have heard it and not known the phrase rogering. She might have just heard it and just not.
That crossed our mind too. We went through every possible scenario to try. What Ben did, he was trying every possible way to sort of ease his conscience. I just found the whole thing very, very amusing. Was just delighted that it wasn't me that made the comments.
Yeah, that's one of many dozens of like really funny stories in the book. I said like your writing style is brilliant, and the way that you tell the story is brilliant. On the topic of blagging, or should we now call it politely requesting? Obviously you got bikes, you got food, you got accommodation. At different points you managed to get like plasters and towels. You got the picnic set, which you pointlessly carried for the entire length of Great Britain.
Yeah.
But what I thought was really cool is you got so confident at telling your story that you actually managed to get some like activities for free, didn't you? I've got it written down somewhere. You had a cable car journey. You had a tour of a whiskey distillery. You went on a speedboat. That's pretty bonus on top of everything else, isn't it?
Yeah, they all sort of happened by accident. The speedboat thing, we were that was in St Ives. We were just sort of asking for a bike. I think we were still asking for bikes at that point, and it was a speedboat operator, and it just sort of came up in conversation. It was like, well, we go out, and that it's not going to get us to John O'Groats, but it'll be entertaining. And yeah, like you say, then cable car. So that was in sort of Scotland, I suppose, because how rural the route we were following in Scotland. You're not passing through any towns, so whenever you come across sort of anything, it's quite exciting. So you pass this a whiskey distillery in the middle of nowhere, and it's the first thing you'd seen in sort of hours. So you'd sort of call in the hope that maybe of getting some food or something like that, and ended up having a whiskey tour and being given a bottle of whiskey, which we carry with us. And then likewise with the cable car, it's at Glencoe. The ski resorts anyway. But we were cycling through the Scottish Highlands, and you pass nothing apart from the random tourist attraction and stuff. So they became sort of highlights of the day where we'd sort of call in, and then it just provided a bit of variety as well to the cycling, because when you're, as you'll know, when you're sitting on a bike all day, it can get a bit sort of boring stuff, and you often pass things when you're cycle touring. You often pass. That's why the benefit of taking longer, because if you pass things, you sort of go, oh, it'd be nice to come back to that point. Whereas if you take your time or do what Ben and I did and have a few excursions, it's quite nice to see something and go, that looks fun. Oh, why don't we go and do it now and stuff? So yeah, we managed to get a cable car trip up the mountain. I'd forgotten about that actually. That was a great excursion.
It's very inspirational. I do find it very inspirational, the just the whole journey that you went on, because yeah, just to see that it's possible. To see that it's possible, and not only is it possible, that you might even be able to do some things like that along the way.
I think you'd be surprised, and I reckon, Seb, if you undertook, you could come up with some far better excursions and far better blagging or polite asking than we did as well. You'd charm your way across the country.
Oh mate, I hope so. I mean, like, I really do want to give it a go. I've got to be honest, actually, you know, like, we've been talking for a while now, so I may as well get into the nitty gritty. This is the type of thing that I would ask you if we were sat in the pub, like. And I had this same conversation when I was speaking to Joe Skeets, who's a guy that he cycled for 3 years quite slowly from England to Australia, and he really took his time. He like pointlessly went over India on the way, so he was in no rush, you know. So when I say pointlessly, it obviously wasn't pointless at all, but he was like really taking a very casual approach, and he did it over 3 years. The issue that I have, right, is like, I don't know, man, I don't sleep very well, so because I don't sleep very well, sometimes I don't sleep very well in my own bed. So the idea of like sleeping on random people's floors or like sleeping in like barns and stuff, I just worry that I'd be an absolute mess. But then I know I've even got that voice in my head now, and it's probably the same thing you're thinking, and it's probably the same thing everyone's thinking, which is like, all right, mate, stop whinging about your delicate sleep and just crack on with it. And I know that that's what would happen, but like, you seem like you were just out for the count every night. Like, do you sleep well?
Do you know the thing? Well, I tend to sleep. I'm pretty good at sleeping, but a good tip to help with your sleeping is to cycle 70 or 80 miles each day on really bad bikes. That definitely helps your sleeping. And presumably when you did your Land's End, did you have any sleeping issues on your Land's End?
Yeah, no, to be honest, it was to be completely honest, and I know that I'm not making myself sound very cool or very hard. So for all 10 people that are still listening an hour and a half into this conversation, I want you to let you know that I am very aware that this doesn't make me sound particularly like a rough and ready traveler. But mate, I'll be honest, like I did wild camp for 3 or 4. I would wild camp for 3 or 4 nights in a row, and then I just couldn't sleep properly. I'd feel so rough that eventually I'd have to check in a hotel, and my exhaustion would increase day on day. Right. And then I'd have to check into a hotel to reset, and then I could go and wild camp again for a couple of days. But even if I sleep like 70, 80 miles, I'd still waking up like at the sound of like foxes and badgers and cars and all that sort of stuff. I'd just be there like...
That's a different kind of stress and fear then, isn't it? Yeah, wild camping. I mean, we had it very easy compared to that. I don't think I'd sleep very well if I was, out in the wild and stuff.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. You slept in hotels half the time. What am I worrying about?
Exactly. There's you like say that you're building up to the occasional hotel. Yeah, it sounds like we were cheating. You did it properly. No wonder you didn't sleep.
Yeah, no, that's true. Did you sleep in beds the majority of the trip? Would you say?
Yeah, probably half and half. The other times we were on floors or camping or greenhouses. Yeah, I'd have to go through the book and do a totting up, but I think probably beds in at least half the occasions.
Yeah, mate, it's amazing. It was an inspirational book. You're an inspirational guy. I want to do the mission. I'm not going to keep going on about it. I'll let you know if it ever happens. I fear that I might be putting it off till next year. You know, that's the thing. It's just like wanting to do it and doing it are just different things, aren't they? But I'll let you know if that changes.
There's a bed here in South Devon, Seb. If you're passing close here, you're welcome anytime. It might even be if you don't have a bike in South Devon, might be able to help you out here.
That would be amazing, but I'm not accepting help from any friends or family, mate. So
I'm not a friend. I've never met you in person. I don't think I count. Really.
That's true. Maybe I could make one exception for the guy that actually wrote the book.
And well, the Falcon's been asking to come out of retirement.
Oh my god, mate, that would be absolutely epic.
I don't want to say that in case, because I mean, I don't know how it wasn't roadworthy when we used it, so God knows what it's like now. So I feel you'd be welcome to it, but I don't want to endorse its road safety credentials.
Yeah. If I managed to get my hands on the Falcon, there'd be such an immense amount of pressure. I'd be like, oh my God, I cannot let anything happen to this bike. I cannot lose this bike. My first thing would be going around bike shops blagging locks, you know?
Seriously, it's not, honestly, it's just gathering dust in the shed. So you're welcome to it.
Oof, mate, I'll tell you what, that might be an offer I can't refuse. All right, mate, that is amazing. That is honestly amazing. Let's round up this conversation. How did it feel getting to John O'Groats? You got there, you spent 3 weeks on the road, you didn't spend a single penny, the absolute epic adventure of a lifetime. What was it like getting to that finish line?
It was bizarre. I mean, weirdly, I think seeing there's a it was so. No, but I mean the occasion, this sort of celebration almost happened a few miles before. I think when you get to the final, in fact, probably about 60 miles before, or maybe we saw our first signpost to John O'Groats. So that's when we first realised we were going to do it. So that was pretty momentous. And then there's a hill above John O'Groats where you're basically just going to be freewheeling down into the attraction. There's a bit of a glamorous word to call it. Have you ever been to? Yeah, we obviously have been.
It's an absolute dive, isn't it?
Yeah. So it was a momentous occasion. It was a bit of an anticlimax. You literally sort of just turn up into a sort of empty car park, nobody there, and it all being over. But weirdly, it wasn't until so there was obviously lots of hugging between the two of us, and it felt great. But it wasn't until being in a car, sort of going home, we got a lift home, and just covering distance and sort of seeing all of this scenery that we'd cycled past, and then you'd be in a car for hours thinking we've cycled, all of this plus lots more and stuff like that. That's what then brought home, because when you're on a bike cycling day in day out, you sort of lose that sort of perspective. And we got a sort of guidebook from a library about a London to John O'Groats trip, but it showed maps in 40-mile chunks, and each bit was like a tiny bit of a page. So it wasn't until sort of after the trip that you get to look at a map of the British Isles and go, what, we cycled all of that?
I know.
And so it took a while for the perspective to hit him, because if you're doing it cycling on a trip, it's just day to day, and you're sort of seeing each chunk and going, today we have to cycle from here to here, and so you miss out on the sort of perspective of the whole thing. So it definitely took a while to sort of sink in, but we're delighted. And Ben, as I say, Ben was sort of losing enthusiasm for the last few weeks, but when we finished it, he was on a real high and stuff, and still talks very fondly about it.
I can really relate to what you're saying about. I remember I got the train back from Wick, which is 15 miles south, obviously, of John O'Groats, down to Glasgow, and it's either a 3 or a 6 hour train journey, and you're sat there heading south for the first time in a month, in my case, and the train's going fast, and you're on the train for hours, and it's like, how the hell did I cycle all of this? How did this happen?
Sense, does it?
No, because it's just doing it day on day. Like you say, it's really difficult to get a perspective of the scale, because you're only doing little bits each day, and then suddenly you're in Scotland, and suddenly you're in the Scottish Highlands, and it's almost like, how did I do this? How did I get here?
It's just little steps, and it all adds up. Just all the different pieces. Yeah, no, it's great.
Well, mate, like I feel like I've gushed over you and your book quite a lot in this conversation, but I am going to say once again what a brilliant book it is, and I really recommend everyone should read it. And I'm also going to say I really want you to know this, even if you don't view it this way yourself, that for me the main takeaway from the book was that I think it was a really courageous thing to do. I think it was brave, and it was adventurous, and you were doing something that no one had ever done before. And a lot of people just wouldn't have the balls to do that. And a lot of people go their whole life wanting to do something like that and never do it. So I'd say you're part of a very small percentage of people that are actually up for doing such a thing. And you did it. And you had a what was the quote that the guy you met in, I think it was Ludlow, you had a life-affirming experience.
Oh, yeah.
You had a life-affirming experience.
The kite surfer.
Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, that's really lovely to hear, Seb. I'm honoured and great to hear you like it. It really was a life-affirming experience. I'm just glad I got to sort of share it. And as I say, I wrote the book sort of predominantly for me as a sort of historical record. Thought a few friends and family would read it, and didn't really expect it to go any further than that. And here we are. Published 14 books now and stuff, and this was just the start. So,
On that note,
yeah.
just before we go, like, what do you have any plans for the future, and where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on social media. I don't sort of at George Mahood. I'm not huge. I don't post an awful lot, but I'm there and can be contacted on all social media channels. And yeah, so I'm writing another book. I've published 7 sort of standalone books. My first 7 were all standalone, and then I've published a series of 6 last year, which are all shorter books, which are about various endurance events that my wife and I have undertaken. And so I'm writing the latest in those series, the Did Not Finish series. That's all about what I've been up to for the last few years. So yeah, it's all good.
Your Facebook updates are... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, I'm sure there'll be plenty more adventures in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just say your Facebook updates are as amusing and entertaining as the book as well. So if anyone does want to check out George, go check it out. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Is it Mahood?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mahood. Yeah,
yeah. I got Mahood or Mahood. I'll be honest, I don't really. My dad, it gets called different people. Yeah, so I'll answer to anything.
Cool. All right, nice one. Well, yeah, go check out check out George Mahood on Facebook, and yeah, buy this or any one of his other 13 books, because yeah, I guarantee you'll enjoy it. Really entertaining. And thanks for watching today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to George. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And yeah, George, thanks a lot, mate. Really enjoyed chatting to you.
Cheers, Seb. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.